Hi, I'm glad to be able to be here to speak to you guys today. I apologize. I saved my customized presentation for your area on my thumb drive, I thought, this morning. When I got here, we didn't, so you get to get the Tisdale presentation that I gave yesterday. But very, very similar, and I'll talk about a few things extra that apply more to you guys. I don't know if any of you guys would know my dad, Ken Goudy, but I grew up in the ag herbicide industry. My dad developed Treflan in the late 60s and early 70s for use on rapeseed, and then also started the group Focus on Inputs to address the high price of Roundup and getting a pre-harvest registration. So that's kind of my upbringing. Grew up in the Melfort area and eventually became an accountant, found out I hate it. Wanted to get back into agriculture, and so started my own company, initially Proactive Producers, in 2013. And I started it in mainly to address, from an ag and a management accounting mindset, what are the growers' needs up in that area? And I think they affect a lot beyond that area as well. But I use the Growing Forward FBDI program to investigate and look at some solutions to the results of that study. And in my mind, with management accountant training, I'm always doing SWOT analysis. And I think it's a good exercise for every business, every farm, to take some time every year and look at what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses, and how am I going to help strengthen those, what are my opportunities and how can I take advantage of those, and what are my threats and how do I mitigate that as well. And so okay, so you guys weren't part of that, but in Tisdale there were several of my clients there who have put money into, I'm a bit of a hybrid. In some ways I'm not necessarily a consultant, and I do sell a lot of Faba beans, buy and sell a lot of Faba beans as well. But in a lot of ways I guess I see myself more as a market developer or an industry developer for Faba beans. So when I started my company up there, you guys probably don't grow much for oats here, but we're the most intensive oat growing area in the world at Melfort Tisdale. And so my main focus started with bringing in price competition by helping the guys sell direct to Quaker and General Mills. Kind of worked myself out of a job on that one. But secondly, quietly, I was doing pre-feasibility studies to see if we could put up an oat mill in the area. And after 2 years and tens of thousands of dollars, the answer was no, not a good idea. The oat market is too mature, it's not really growing, and even though we were shipping all of our oats down to Minnesota and Iowa and whatever, and taking the beating from, difficult rail service at times, it just didn't look good. And so I thought, okay, darn, I'm gonna have to shut down my company, go get a real job. But a number of my growers at the time were trying Faba beans, and they said, no, don't quit. Just shift your focus off of oats onto Faba beans, because these grow great here, but the market's a disaster. And so if you could figure out a market for Faba beans, that would be way more valuable to us even than an oat mill. So I said, okay, I'll take up that challenge, but first, what's a Faba bean? I'd heard the word before, didn't know anything about it, but I thought, okay, I'll dive in and see if I can learn all I can about this crop. And I'm really glad I did, because the more I learned, the more it encouraged me that this is going to be a very valuable crop for this province. And then also I found out as well that we don't need a mill up in that area, an oat mill. Because we stumbled onto hulless oats, and that's actually going to be a better program for us than an oat mill. I don't know how much canola is grown in this area. Would you guys grow a fair bit of canola here? Okay.
It's an important crop.
Okay. Yeah, and same for us. If we all of a sudden couldn't grow canola in northeastern Saskatchewan, we might as well turn the lights out and go somewhere else. And so a lot of my motivation with developing a faba bean industry has been related to how do we protect canola. And no, I guess I don't go too far into it in this presentation. I only had 10 minutes yesterday in Tisdale, so I don't have a great deal of slides here. But protecting canola is so key for us. And as we get more of a threat of club root and we're pushing our rotations too hard, you know, we need at least one more crop, hopefully several crops, that we could profitably spread out that rotation. And I really believe that faba beans is going to be a big solution to that. I haven't done a whole lot with canola. I tried to pick a few different areas that I could help farmers in where either nobody's doing it or maybe not a good job is being done. And so one of the things that I have done for a lot of our growers is developed a canola hedging program that is very simple, it's low risk, and locks in a floor price but leaves open a ceiling price. And so if anybody wants to talk with me about that afterwards, I'll be around today as well. Got into peas a little bit, mainly dun peas or Dakota peas. Anybody growing them here? Okay. They're a good fit for some strategic markets that will be coming up in the not too distant future. Sherry Lynn, was that you that said there was 92,000 acres of them grown last year, or was that somebody else yesterday? Okay. Okay, so anyways, but my main focus is faba beans. And I really believe if we build this industry carefully, it will have a lot of benefits for us as growers, as a province in general, and will be a huge help in our battle against club root. When you look at the faba bean growing areas this past year, it's interesting to look at the acreage shift. A lot of faba beans initially were grown in the south, and as farmers realized that we weren't going to get huge rainfall like we had in 15 and 16, that once we started getting into more historical rain patterns, you can see across the south there, virtually no faba beans grown anymore, just because they do need that moisture. Yet up in the Melfort-Tisdale area, the two egg districts there, we're over 13,000 acres in each one, and that's based on crop insurance. I think it's quite a bit higher than that. And I do believe that in a lot of irrigation areas, faba beans will be a good fit as well. But they do need that moisture. And I really believe that we've had some misunderstanding and misinformation on faba beans and markets and where we fit. One of the things that really helped me right off the bat when I started delving into faba beans was SaskPulse contracted a guy named Joe Firetag from Oxford University in the United Kingdom to do a comprehensive study on the world and especially Canadian market for faba beans. And that was extremely helpful. And Joe as well said, Egypt is not our market, but most of the production in Canada in previous years was targeting trying to break into that market. And I'll touch on that as we go along here. But I really believe if all the stakeholders involved in faba beans or potentially in faba beans in Western Canada understand the situation fully, then there should be great opportunity for us in faba beans to dramatically increase our acres and be unique in the world, and not be putting ourselves in the situation that we're in with canola, where one country is taking 50% of our raw production. And all of a sudden one day they say, we don't like you anymore, we're not taking your production. Or another country in peas is taking over 50% of our production, and one day they say, no, we decide we're going a different direction. we don't want your peas anymore. And so that kind of situation is often where we are in Canada. And we hear the mantra that, you know, you guys have to diversify, you have to do processing, you have to do value added, and it's easy to say, it is difficult to do. But I really believe that faba beans is going to be the crop that is going to lend itself best to not get into that situation and to really develop a domestic value added industry. So you can see here, maybe this isn't the best or easy to see from where you are, but just showing the two graphs there. The one on the left is the global faba bean consumption. Now this is a little bit older data, but it hasn't changed a whole lot on the percentages. The big, I don't know what color that is, sort of blue-purple on the right there, that's China. China is the biggest producer and consumer of faba beans. They don't hardly import any, they don't hardly export any, but they do like faba beans in China. The red one is Egypt. So Egypt is one of the major consumers of faba beans in the world. There's probably 1 billion people worldwide that eat faba beans, if not every day, very regularly. So they are a very important crop to a lot of countries, but we don't hear about them because they're so important that most of these countries are self-sufficient. They grow their own faba beans, except for Egypt. So you can see on the right, that's global imports. So Egypt, 100 million people, very small land base. They can't hope to produce enough faba beans, so they import almost 3/4 of the world's exports of faba beans. So they are the key player. But Egypt, Egypt likes nice-looking faba beans. And Australia has become the biggest exporter of faba beans worldwide. Australia grows the nicest looking faba beans in the world. Canada grows the ugliest faba beans in the world. And that's okay. It's actually been a benefit to us. If we could grow nice looking beans like the Australians, we'd be putting ourselves in the same situation that we are with a lot of crops where it's just easier, you know, grow them, ship out the raw product. Because we have the ugliest beans in the world, and because a lot of these growers said, geez, you know, please figure out a market for faba beans, one of the things that Joe recommended in his study is look into fractionation. And he said fractionation is probably going to be the future of a faba bean industry in Canada. And so what is fractionation? So fractionation, in the bottom you see there, you start with the whole bean, and then you dehull them or split them. And so most grains, most crops are made up of 3 or 4 ingredients, and so when you dehull them, the hulls are mainly fiber. And so there are potential markets for the hulls, but it is more difficult to sell. Then when you're left with the cotyledon or the split or whatever you want to call it, then you grind that into such a fine powder that you can actually separate the smaller protein particles from the larger starch particles. And the demand worldwide for plant-based proteins is just skyrocketing. And it's not just the meat replacement market. There's other demands for it besides that. But that's really what fractionation is all about, to produce a protein concentrate, and then you also have a starch concentrate as well. And I really believe that fractionation is the key, and that Saskatchewan and Alberta can own that market, and especially going into the North American food market. And I really believe that fractionation is the future of Saskatchewan faba beans. It will provide a very stable, consistent, and profitable market for our beans. I don't believe that domestic fractionation is the future of peas. And as much as a lot of people are really hoping that that would provide a domestic market and demand and opportunity for peas, I don't believe, unless there's significant development and breeding, that's going to be the future for peas. Because peas are lower in protein than faba beans, and they have a strong, unpleasant taste. And when you're going into food markets, and one of your biggest issues is you're trying to introduce a strong enough taste that will negate that strong taste of the pea protein, then you have problems. And they're finding that already with peas. And the Egyptian markets, I really don't believe are the future for Canadian faba beans either. The Egyptian market is very fickle. Again, they want nice looking beans. They want big beans. They are a limited market that's not really growing. And they have difficult spec standards, probably easier for you guys to hit, but up in northeastern Saskatchewan, where we really grow the ugliest beans in the world, it's very difficult for us to hit that. And Australian beans are more desirable. And so, as far as numbers go in the last number of years, as far as Canadian exports to countries, especially Egypt, there's been opportunity for us to ship out. On average, we're usually around that 20,000 tons a year, or 750,000 bushels. The last couple of years, why we've seen such high prices and almost a doubling of opportunity to send to Egypt is because Australia's been dry. When Australia is not dry, they do not want our beans. They would be glad to take all Australian beans if they could. And I'm very thankful that they have taken even our snowbirds, even not the tannin beans, but in the last few years. But we are setting ourselves up for a correction when Australia does produce a good crop. So again, keys to a bright future for faba beans in Saskatchewan are number one, taste. So tannin, if you're not familiar with it, tannin is just a bitter tasting substance that is in a lot of foods occurring naturally. It's in wines and different things. The natural original faba bean was a tannin bean. But in the last number of years, especially in Canada, we have bred tannin out of some of our varieties, and mainly because hogs do not like that bitter taste. And so growing tannin beans, you eliminate that hog feed market, which is the highest premium per feed. So as far as taste goes, zero tannin equals bland taste. Now that doesn't sound too exciting, but it's actually very valuable for us. Same thing as that strong taste that the peas have. The zero tannin fabas don't have it. It's a mild, pleasant taste. You don't have to cover it up. And so I believe bland is good for the North American food market, a lot of times because they're just looking to add protein and not a taste to a lot of different foods, in both meat replacement markets and in traditional food markets. And bland, like I said, is also good for hog feed markets, and hog feed pays the best in a world where, especially in the north, we are going to be producing a lot of feed quality beans. So FB94s, I don't know, has anybody grown FB94s here? Okay, probably pretty easy to seed, I guess.
Twice.
Yeah, so they're an example of what they like in Egypt, and so that's why AGP has been really promoting that whole program. But FB94s, I break it down differently. Some people call our snowbirds low tannin. I would call them zero tannin. They're not completely zero, but they're virtually zero. But in the tannin beans, there's different levels of tannin. Some have a lot more percentage of the tannin and thus are much more bitter, and then others have less. And so FB94 is up here. It's the most bitter bean we can grow. And so it created a lot of difficulty because, again, if guys in the north growing these beans, we're going to have some poorer quality, whether it's lygus bug damage or frozen beans or whatever. And once you have that situation, you can't sell them into the hog feed market. And so you just take a beating. You have almost an unsaleable product. most guys didn't want to have to pay to have them dehulled, you know, or whatever. And so it was a real problem. And that's a lot of the reason why Western Canada is now 95% or more zero tannins. And of those zero tannins, snowbirds make up the vast majority of acres. And even some years where we do have good quality, again, if Australia has a big crop, they don't necessarily want ours. And if they do, it's at a reduced price. So I really believe that our lemons, if you want to say that, you know, life gave us lemons, we grow the ugliest beans in the world. In some ways, that has pushed us to be creative and pushed us towards developing a value-added industry here. So faba beans have at least two major anti-nutritional factors. One, like I say, is the tannin that affects taste. And zero, or at least a lower tannin, like there is a variety available called Fababean, is best for the markets that I believe we want to hit. If we only want to grow 100,000 acres of faba beans in Western Canada, we can be content with squeezing a little bit into Egypt and selling most of it for hog feed. But that taste we can deal with by growing what we have now, zero tannin varieties. But the other anti-nutritional factor can affect safety, and it's called Bicene conbicene. And what that does is it can trigger a very rare but potentially fatal disease called Fababean. It's not going to affect any of us. It's mainly just people of Middle Eastern and Mediterranean ethnic backgrounds. Even among them, it is a very, very uncommon disease, but it's named after faba beans, or faba beans as they're known as well. And so that's not a very good thing to have on your resume as far as an industry goes. But we also found that it does reduce feed efficiency in hogs and chickens in some of these markets that we want to target as well. And so there are some new low Bicene varieties becoming available. So Fababean is not a zero tannin, but it's a low tannin. It's the first one commercially available. I don't know if there's any seed growers in this area, but I'm going to have a few fields of Fababean grown this year. We're going to grow a few in northeastern Saskatchewan. We're growing a couple on irrigation in southern Alberta, and I'd like to have at least one in this area, if there's anybody interested in that. But we have these new zero tannin, low Bicene varieties becoming available. And I really believe that as a whole country, we should embrace those and push out the tannin beans and push out the higher Bicene, conbicene varieties. The soy, people in the food industry in North America have been looking for a soy replacement. So we are starting construction on a major fractionation mill in the Tisdale area in the next few months, and I really believe that will be the start of changing the game for faba beans. We've already been in discussion with Beyond Meat and Possible Foods, you know, as far as buying our protein for meat replacement. But if that whole thing dried up and disappeared tomorrow, we wouldn't really care. That wasn't what we were aiming for. It just happens to be a market that is interested in our product. But we've had a lot of discussions with Kraft, with Kellogg, with Nestle, that say we need a replacement for soy. Soy is in so many foods that we eat in North America, but soy is an allergen for one thing, and it's high in estrogen. And I don't really think we should probably be eating as much soy as we are. But so the industry has been looking for a soy replacement. And we started with peas, but again, the problem with peas is they're lower in protein. You can only get up to about 55% protein in your pea protein concentrate. With fabas, we can get to 65 to 70%. And again, pea has that strong, unpleasant taste that all these food companies are going, yikes, how do we cover this up? But with faba beans, it's a mild, pleasant taste that you don't have to cover up. So that's why I really believe that fabas, the fractionation is the future and the key for faba beans. But the soy industry is not going to appreciate somebody coming along and saying, hey, we got a better quality product that is way safer and whatever. And so if we still have Vicene, convicene in our faba beans, and the soy world goes, geez, you know, there's a real Achilles heel that we can take advantage of, and it goes on social media. Don't eat this stuff, it creates this, you know, deadly disease, you know, and whatever. So that's why I really believe that we need to embrace these new varieties. Initially, when we were moving towards fractionation and putting this mill up, we assumed we would be selling it all for fish feed. And there's a bottomless pit of demand for plant-based protein to go into the fish feed market, but it's not as profitable as the food market. And so then once we found out that the food market wanted it, and these new Vicene, low Vicene, convicene varieties were going to be available, then we shifted direction and we want to target the food market, which is much more valuable for growers as well, because then we can afford to pay more for the actual beans. But purity is key. Purity is extremely important. Fabas are very unique in that they cross-pollinate so profusely and over such great distances that it can and it has been a real problem, especially concerning those two anti-nutritional factors, the tannin and then the Vicene, convicene. So high tannin beans will contaminate zero tannin beans, and you'll be able to see it visually. Tannin beans have more of an orangey color, zero tannin are kind of a gray-green. And so I've seen some samples where guys have had contamination, and it's like, what are all these orange beans doing in your sample? And it's because somehow the fields got grown too close together and cross-pollinated. We don't have near as much problem now that there's hardly any tannin beans grown, but and that's been a very good thing. We've been able to maintain the purity. You can also spot it in the field. I had a bunch of guys call me this summer, and they said, hey, I think I got some kind of disease in my field. Like, what are these black spots in my flowers? And so a zero tannin field will be all white flowers. A tannin field will be white spots, or white flowers with black spots in the middle. I said, no, it's not a disease. You're just getting cross contamination through cross-pollination. And so that's caused some guys some problems. So then their zero tannin beans weren't zero tannin anymore. With the cross-pollination, their zero tannin beans were reverting to the natural tannin. And so I'm glad that we were able to see that visually with the tannin. Because with the high Vicene, convicene beans, they will contaminate the low Vicene, convicene beans. Only you won't be able to see it. There will be no visual clues. And I believe that it is very important and very valuable for us to switch over. But that switching over will take a lot of effort and a lot of working together. Because, you know, so it was sort of interesting. A few years ago, I got invited to the U of S when a bunch of their researchers were giving results of some feeding trials that they were doing on a number of different animals, a number of different markets. And so I sat there most of the morning, and each researcher said, yeah, we fed, you know, whatever it was, hogs or fish or, you know, or whatever. And they said, yeah, lentils were good, peas were good, soy was good, faba beans were bad. Faba beans were bad? How can that be? Then the next research, same thing, lentils good, peas good, soy good, faba's bad. And after 4 or 5 of these, all saying the same thing, I thought, wow, I'm gonna have to reconsider my vocational direction here. What's going on? And so finally we got to the last one, and I was sitting beside Rex Newkirk, who is the feed chair at the U of S, and I'm looking at Rex like, what's going on here? So finally the last guy, his last slide he put up was all his sponsors, and in the middle it was big AGT. And I thought, oh no, I think I know what happened here. And so anyways, I asked the one guy, well, do you know what variety your faba beans were that you were using? If it would have been peas or lentils or soy, you know, it would have been like, what are you, crazy man? What does it matter? Who cares? But with faba beans, it's a big deal. So he looked kind of like I was a nutcase or whatever. And I said, well, at least where did you get your beans from? Well, AGT donated them all. I thought, oh, okay. Those 9-4s are the most bitter beans that you can use. And the FDA, they've done a bunch of feeding trials in the US as well. And the FDA recommends do not feed faba beans to animals because of that bitterness, and then also the Visine convisine affects it as well. And so I had all these researchers looking at me with a, oh no, we just wasted hundreds of thousands of dollars and years of these trials, and we were using the wrong beans. And I said, yeah, like you should have used snowbirds, but you know, so now they have to go back and redo all these feeding trials. And so we have the opportunity where we can rebrand faba beans in Western Canada, just like we did all those years ago with rapeseed. We made some functional changes through breeding in rapeseed to develop canola, and it was different enough that Canada, you know, they had foresight back then to say, let's rebrand this. That we don't grow rapeseed anymore in Western Canada, we grow canola. It's a superior product, and we rebranded it well. And it's been a huge benefit to Western Canada. I believe we can do the same thing with faba beans. We can rebrand so that we don't grow faba beans anymore, which are full of tannin, high in Visine, convisine, but we grow a new crop that then we can redo feeding studies, number one, but also into the food markets that we want to go into where they do care if they kill somebody by triggering a disease like fabism, that we have a superior product. Nobody else in the world can do this. And it's only because we grow the ugliest beans in the world that we're sort of given that opportunity. Because if a farmer in France or in Australia or whatever decides, well, I'm going to bring in these zero tannin, low Visine varieties, and his neighbors don't really care because the markets that they're selling into, they don't care about Visine, they like the tannin. Pretty soon he's not going to have zero tannin or low Visine because his neighbors aren't on board. But I believe in Canada, and that's why I speak as many places as I can to try to get this information out there. We have the opportunity to be the only country in the world that has opportunity to do this. And plus the market is just not there to continue growing what we're growing. There's not going to be opportunity to get up to 1 million acres in Western Canada just to sell into Egypt and some other of those markets. And so we can't grow high tannin and zero tannin beans in the same area. And we cannot grow both the old high Visine, convisine varieties and the new low Visine, convisine varieties in the same area as well. Or we're just going to have a contaminated mess and we're going to be worse off even than we were before. But we can have that competitive edge over the rest of the world if we will embrace the purity of these new varieties. And I don't believe that we'll have the opportunity to have a thriving value-added industry here if we're not all on the same page. And so as far as purity goes for of rebranded faba beans, I believe we can build a future that will put us at that competitive advantage over the rest of the world and allow us to do the value-added processing that everybody tells us we should be doing here and we know would be valuable for us, but is just difficult to do. But it will take working together, and it will take starting now. I've met with a lot of the different breeders, and you know, DL Seeds, for example, I went out to see them in Warden, Manitoba, and I said, well, would you like to see our tannin beans varieties or our zero tannin bean varieties first? And I said, well, as far as your tannin beans go, you might as well bring a disc in. And disc them up. Oh, okay. Well, do you want to see our low Visine varieties or our high Visine varieties? I said, same thing. You might as well take a disc, come in here, and get rid of all your high Visine varieties. Well, they're a little shocked that I'm being so so stark, you know, response on that. But I really believe that if we understand our opportunity, when I showed you that graph there of the demand in Egypt, worldwide export demand worldwide for faba beans is about 750,000 tons. I intend to have, my group at Tisdale intends to have a mill up that will handle 300,000 metric tons, and we'll follow it fairly closely with another mill in Edmonton, another 300,000 metric tons. So almost the entire export demand of the world with 2 fractionation mills. And I don't doubt that a lot of the pea fractionators, they already are starting to switch over. There's 2 major pea fractionators that asked me to source them faba beans even this year. And so they're starting to see the writing on the wall that, yikes, why would we fractionate peas when we can fractionate faba beans?